Here we go again with a Will It Run Ford Industrial 172 cubic inch 4-cylinder engine, overhead valve. Let's do this. $172 cubic inch industrial engine. I don't know what its use was, but it's in pretty rough shape. So I'd like to see if I can get it running. It's missing the distributor cap, spark plug wires, wire to the coil. I was told that this engine went through a flood. The oil looks great. There might be a little bit of something floating around in there, but if there's any water in this engine, it's going to be at the very bottom. So I'm not really sure what that's going to turn into. It's missing the water pump pulley. Looks like this engine has a generator on it. Kind of surprising that it doesn't have a GM alternator. That seems to be extremely common with older engines like this. Looks like the starter was rebuilt at one point in time. Just guessing by the way it's painted, but maybe somebody just got crazy with some spray paint. Got an updraft carburetor. I don't know if that is a Chinese knockoff or not. It looks like it's not. It's common with older engines. It almost looks like there's some blue paint on the frost plug down there. It's got a 2-groove shev on it. Rockford PTO. That's pretty awesome. And this all seems to be free. This was sitting in a barn, so if this motor's going to run, it's got a pretty good chance. I think it was in undercover before that, although it endured a flood. I don't totally know what this is going to be like. I was told the engine rotates 3/4 and then locks up. I've yet to see any rods hanging out the side of the block, any critical damage, but if they're robbing parts off it, it must have some type of issue. I was checking out the governor on it. I thought the governor was missing. It seems to be that it's an internal style. I think it's all there otherwise. And it must be that the governor may have been one set speed. I don't know if it was a multi-speed governor or not. I don't really know. What's supposed to be here. I'm not sure. Maybe there was a rod that's missing that would go out of here. And okay, this looks like there may have been a cable or something here. So it would have a throttle. Oh. Got a Wix oil filter. It's definitely, that filter's got some age on it. So assuming it did go through a flood, I've been looking for cracks and whatnot as I'm walking around this thing, and I've yet to see anything. Honestly, this engine's looking better than I have first expected it would look. Jeez, I guess I'm a little weak. What's going on here? Looks like the foam element that's there. Maybe that's steel wool. Geez, almost looks like an emery cloth. Interesting. Okay, yep, can't see in there. So where I'm going to start is I'm going to pull all the spark plugs, see what they look like, drop some oil down the spark plug holes, and try to rotate the crankshaft here and see where I get. Yep. Okay. So that's telling me right there is somebody was messing with this thing before me and they gave up. Typically what happens, you start here and when you're all done with it, you just toss it back together. So this spark plug looks fine. This one looks good. Threads are a little wet, assuming oil. Okay, this one, threads are wet with oil. This one's just got a little carbon hanging out on it, but it looks like the whole thing is wet with oil. A lot of times what I do is when I store an engine, I'll put a lot of oil on it, just in case if any moisture condensation gets in there, it's less apt to rust things up. So maybe that's the case. Maybe they did what I'm about to do. I don't know. Any oil is better than oil. Not gonna get crazy with this. Just gonna put some in there where the assumption is maybe it's not too bad. All right. So I got looking around here. I don't know if I can get the camera set up. You can see that there's a thermostat down in there. I don't think this camera is doing justice, but that thing's like half filled with rust, dirt, not sure. Nothing good. Definitely looks like it's been some time. Oh boy, this might be a bigger challenge than I thought. If you don't know what size it is, just grab them all. Okay, looks to be 15/16. Okay, just turned, but it made a kind of weird sound. Okay, it sounds like the starter's rotating. So let's just try the other direction. It's kind of harder to rotate and making kind of a different sound. So I think that's what it... So I think there's a sprag in the starter, the same thing as a ratchet. So when I go one way, it sounds like a ratchet going backwards, and then going this way, it's a little harder to turn. It sounds like the whole starter's rotating. So I think I might turn on this a little more. See if that thing might just let go. Seems to be somebody was rotating this thing when they gave up. I see that the rotor here is rotating, so that's a good sign that the camshaft is turning. Okay, I'm a little confused. I was told it turned 3/4 and come to a dead stop. Looks like we got some junk and pine needles falling out from behind that pulley. Okay, well that was unexpected. Let's see if the PTO works. So I'm turning the crankshaft, and the shiv is not rotating. Okay, with the lever in the other direction. Now the shiv rotates. So that confirms that we got a one-piece crankshaft, and also that Rockford works. So this is all actually looking pretty good. I think the next step's probably going to be investigating this starter situation. So I'll see what we got going on in there. Come on, you little devil. It's definitely loose. It's just... I'm going to end up beating that thing to a pulp before it comes off. Alright, now that that starter is out, alright, mistakes were made. Starter is off here. You can see that this thing is in the engaged position. It's kind of these slanted splines. So it brings it closer to the starter. And you can hear it. That's that ratchet sound I was talking about. The shaft of the starter is not rotating. It's just the gear. If we go the other way, it's trying to rotate the whole thing. And also you can see the in and out travel that's happening right there, and that's because of these. So I gotta figure out why it's not retracting. Oh, right there is actually the ratchet itself. Here's up close to the ratchet. I didn't realize you could actually just see it. It's just kind of one-way teeth. Okay, so I don't know, a little oil, work that thing around, it'll come into it. Alright, now that I got a battery hooked up, spark plugs are out, there's oil in the cylinders, so I'm going to go ahead and see if the starter will crank it over. The Bendix gear is not doing what it needs to do, but it'll at least crank over the engine so I can check over a few things before I get too invested in this. Oh, would you look at that? Well, come on. What is your problem here? Oh, I see oil come out of all 4 cylinders, so that's promising. I'm just gonna quickly put my finger over each spark plug hole, and judging by the feel and the sound, I'm gonna know if there's compression. How much, I don't know, but I'll at least know that there's something. Alright, yeah, it seems to be doing everything it needs to do. Here's cylinder number 1. Oh, holy Moses. Still a little bit of oil hanging out in there, but the compression gauge is saying, jeez, it's like halfway between 210 and 240, like 225 psi. Jeez. When you're doing a compression test, you need to make sure that it's wide open throttle. It helps a lot too having a good battery, but I'm just trying to get a real rough baseline that this engine is making good enough compression to run on. I am quite baffled that there is 225 psi on cylinder number 1. So now here's cylinder number 2. Cylinder number 2, somewhere around 260, 255. I'm a little confused. Seems like a boatload of compression for an engine like this. God, normally I'm complaining about not enough compression. Not that I'm complaining about too much, but what is going on here? I don't know why my gauge is a little messed up. It's fitting on the hose a little loose. Here's cylinder number 3. Almost 240. The oil I put in the cylinders is going to boost the compression. I was mainly putting it in there just to make sure everything was lubricated that needs to be lubricated. So these numbers I'm getting, they're not right on accurate, but they should be closer than what they are. I'll have to look up what the compression is supposed to be on this engine, but I sure wasn't expecting that much. Like, you gotta be joking. The gauge only goes as far as 300, and it's nearly all the way to 300. And it's not that my gauge is bad, I feel the whole hose swelling. Goodness gracious, what is going on with this little engine? I have a feeling there's a lot of oil in the cylinders, and that must be why I'm getting some astronomical numbers here. So just a quick recap on our quick compression test here. Got 225 psi cylinder 1, got 255 on cylinder number 2, got 240 on cylinder number 3, and got 300 on cylinder 4. How accurate that is, don't know. There's gotta be a lot of fluid in each of these combustion chambers, and that's why I'm getting such high numbers. But with the size of the number aside, at least these numbers are somewhat in the ballpark of each other. But still, if there's oil, like a lot of oil, in each of these cylinders, yes, it's going to boost it up a lot. And of course, it's not going to be equivalent anyway. So, I mean, this test is nothing to really go off of much. But at least it's making compression. I'm wondering if the starter isn't turning it over fast enough to evacuate it all. I don't know. That is unique. Anyways, I still need some parts for this. I'm baffled that it's looking the way that it is. I gotta get wires, I gotta get a cap. Assuming that that coil is gonna work and this carburetor is gonna be able to clean up good enough to operate. That's what it's gonna take to at least get this thing fired up. I don't always change the oil right off the bat. Stuff is getting pretty expensive. Here we got, is that a bubble? Well, there's a little bit of water in the oil. So it does need an oil change. So a lot of cleaning, but I'm sure this thing will come around. I am a little confused why someone stopped using this. We understand your setup changes and you don't need it anymore, but it seems like a good little rig. Here we go, some new parts. Mainly needed the cap out of this. I ordered this by application for a Ford 801 tractor. So they had this engine, the 172. The tractors had a few different engines, and it seems like the parts are fairly universal. So I already had checked and made sure that my cap was going to fit what I have going on here, and it does. And it always pays to be observant. This whole distributor is loose. You have a bolt here, this fancy looking washer, I guess. It holds down the distributor, and that's what keeps it right on time. Being that it's loose, someone had been monkeying with this thing, I guess, trying to get it to run, because if your timing's not where it needs to be or somewhat close, it's not going to run. So that's I'm going to have to mess with that because I have no idea where it's at. I don't have a book on this engine. And I have this cap here. I guess it's a dust cover. Goes over the points. It says align with oiler. I'll just monkey with it until it fits. And this is sort of important because it also has a notch and that corresponds with the cap. But I guess it's whichever one I'm going to designate as number one. So being that this thing is all apart like this, it's actually not as difficult as it would seem. So all the parts kind of fit together one way, and if they don't fit together, well, you have it together the wrong way. I'll probably reuse the old points and use the new stuff from there on, other than the plugs, because I don't want to oil foul them. I have a good feeling this thing might sit around for a little while, and the points are going to get dirty anyway, so I put new points on it. The other thing to keep in mind is your coil. I wasn't sure if this was going to be 6 volt or not. The way you can tell is by looking at it. A lot of times your coil will say right on it if it is 6 or 12 volt, and if you don't know what your system is and it doesn't say right on the coil, the other place to be looking at would be the starter, because the side of the starter should say 12 or 6. The spark plug gap is 27 thousandths, points gap is 25 thousandths, firing order is 1243, and this engine is about 55 horsepower. Alright, so this dust cap says align with oiler. Oiler meaning the oiler on the distributor right here. Boom. Here's the rotor. Has a flat spot. Goes one way. I'm going to turn this engine by hand clockwise and put my finger in the spark plug hole, and I'm going to wait for air to come up out of that spark plug hole. And that's when I know cylinder number 1 is on the compression stroke. And when I get to the point to where the air stops coming, I'm going to know that that piston is near top dead center. And wherever this rotor is pointing, that's going to dictate where my cylinder number 1 is. And then from there, the firing order. Okay, right about there. Looks like directly forward is where my number 1 is going to be. Now this cap does have a small tang on it, so my cap can only go on one spot. But all I gotta do is just put a mark here. I know right about where that is pointing. And then when I stick my cap on there, I can just turn the whole distributor, since the jam nut or jam bolt is loose. Okay, so I just barely got the cap on. Knowing that that rotor is pointing right here, all I have to do is line up one of the spark plug connectors on the cap with that mark, and that's going to be top dead cylinder for cylinder number 1. Now, basically, if I was extremely accurate, that would be 0 degrees. It doesn't take very much of moving this in order to change it a lot. So I'm going to start there. Goes that one because I didn't move it very far. And the oiler, you can get to it easy, and these snaps you can get to easy. So I'm assuming this is probably the location it's supposed to be. I still find it odd that it is loose, but I'll snug that. It's a good idea to start with the shortest one. In this case, it's number 1. It's a good thing to check the direction of your rotor. Some engines are different. I'm going to assume this one's clockwise, but I should have checked it when I had the cap off. But I'm just going to run with it and see where I get. I just tightened all the spark plugs. What is going on here? Just barely tightened all these spark plugs. I went to put on the spark plug wire. And I'm not turning the whole spark plug. I'm just turning the ceramic. So that's neat. The electrode itself, the whole thing rotates. The positive side of a coil gets 12 volts all the time. The other side of the coil is the one that routes over to the points here. So that one's basically on, off, on, off, on, off constantly. So brief overview here. Just got 12 volts on the positive side of the coil. The other side of the coil goes over here to the points. That just makes a connection to ground, which excites the coil, and then it can get distributed here. Nothing fancy. They're all pretty well the same. I might see if I have an oil pressure gauge kicking around. Maybe we'll just throw some fuel right in the carburetor and see if it'll pop off. I have a feeling it probably will. And then the next thing I'm going to have to address is a fuel system. I don't know if this pump works or not, but this is the line that gets that goes to the tank. And you can see it's all stopped up with stuff, but I'll have to lengthen this line to go to a fuel tank. And it's got this bent up line that goes to the carburetor on the other side. I don't know how dirty the carburetor is going to be. It's probably shot, but sometimes you'll be surprised. So maybe I'll give it a go with the way that it is, see what it does. And if it doesn't do what it needs to do, then I'll clean it out. Ignition is hot. No idea where the throttle's at. Fuel system's complete. Holy heavens. Raw straight to the mouth. Right at my face. Nice. Let's put on some safety glasses. Throttle's that wide open right now. Bruce, that is loud. Awesome. Alright, so it's a runner. There's oil all over the place from inside of that thing shooting out of the exhaust. Of course, I couldn't catch it on camera, but I was looking at it. The oil pressure, it was at least 10. But of course, it was just barely starting. And if there's water in it, you should start to see something on the stick. It really don't look bad at all. It is a little low. So I should throw something in there at least. So, figure out the fuel system, you know, I was joking. Take a joke. I got to figure out the fuel system, figure out the carburetor. Just working on the fuel system here. So, I primed this line just so that the pump was good and wet. I've never dealt with what I would call a sediment bowl upside down like this. It seems kind of odd to me. I mean, it's nice that you can look at it and see on the inside. So I guess the true filter here is going to be this little piece of screen. Looks pretty good, some junk on it. But the reason why I took it off is, like I said, I primed it. And you can see, if you would just come out. Okay, thanks. This little gasket ain't no good. But I have the wrong O-ring here. It seems to be sealing, so that's fine. Yes, it's blue. That's because I stole some chainsaw gas. That's all I got. That inlet right there is where the fuel goes into this, It is still a sediment style. Has a screen on the top, but as fuel comes in there, any dirt or debris or whatever will fall down to the side. The inlet is on the other side of the screen, pulling from the top. It seems to be that if I put my hand over the carburetor, it helps to pull fuel. So there is a chance that carburetor may not be completely crap, but I don't know. The choke was seized up. It's still partially seized up. So that's not a great sign, but I guess we'll see if this thing can run off its own fuel. Okay, ignition is hot. I'm gonna use my hand as a choke. Alright, that's promising. That is really promising. That runs way better than I thought it would. So this oil pressure gauge is actually a tire pressure gauge that identifies itself as an oil pressure gauge, but that's fine. I didn't touch the carburetor. Just gas here and fixing that O-ring, and I can't believe that carburetor works good enough to run. I am sure the float is sticking on it. It seems to be definitely very rich. I never touched the timing again. That was right where I left it. I am sure it's not right on, but it's clearly good enough to run. Another good indication is that there's no exhaust or anything coming out of the coolant system, because if your head gasket's bad, you're going to see something there if it's extremely bad. But being at this motor's head around, you never know what's wrong with it. Well, it looks better this time, but there is definitely some moisture in there. Not a tremendous amount, but I don't know what I'll use this motor for, but I got a really great candidate for something. I mean, that PTO makes it so handy to just set up on some type of piece of stationary equipment. So if I use it for something, gotta address the water pump situation, missing the pulley, radiator, coolant hoses. I mean, clearly it would have to be mounted on something and a real fuel system. I'm sure the carburetor needs to get rebuilt. This oil filter is probably older than I am. I don't know, but it definitely needs a servicing. The starter worked good on disengaging. I was a little worried about that, but it seemed to work just fine. There's definitely a lot of junk that was sitting inside of that bell housing. As you can see here, I left this cover off, and now my once was clean battery is covered in that stuff. Well, here we go. It's the next day. Okay, so I did a compression test again after running the engine. This is the first time before the engine was running. This is after. Now, normally the compression will go up when an engine sits for a while. It's cleaning up cylinder walls, whatever else. In this case, it went down, which the reasoning for that is because there was oil in the cylinders. And what that was doing was basically making the combustion chamber a little bit smaller when doing the test. I did have all the spark plugs out and rotated the engine over with the starter, and that's only going to get so much of the oil out. So what was left in there was taking up some of that space in the combustion chamber, therefore creating a higher PSI. Also, has helped sealing the rings for what that's worth. This is a cold compression test. It's not warm. Both of these are cold because it was not running from the get-go. Anyways, this is great. It's nice to see that they're all really close. Number 4 cylinder is the lowest at 160. I'm gonna get the plugs in it. It's cold. Just see how this thing fires up from an initial start. Man, what a unit. Absolutely love this old stuff. They sure don't make it like they used to. So drop a comment down below if you know a thing or two about these engines. I only know so much, and with how old it is, you can only read so much on Google. But it's great reading through the comments and seeing people drop some knowledge that they know about these things. Which ones were good, which ones were bad, unique things about them, the year ranges, the uses of them. Maybe this engine will be used in a future video, I'm not sure. It's going to come down to what I get into next. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching.